So, good morning and welcome to Great Divorce with Janet Boyle. We're so glad that you could join us this morning. My name is Kristen Mertz from Elderwerks Educational Services. And just a reminder that this is being recorded and will be posted to our Facebook, YouTube, and our website. Elderworks is a not-for-profit 501c3 organization, and our mission is to provide seniors and their families with information, referrals, and guidance for senior living, home care, and support services to help make appropriate decisions. The guidance we provide helps seniors stay home well or transition successfully into a new senior living opportunity. We provide education on a variety of aging topics for consumers and professionals who work with seniors. We ask that any questions you may have, add to the chat box and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Janet. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you. I'm Janet Boyle with Family Law Solutions, and we are a family law firm that handles primarily divorce cases, legal separations, prenuptial agreements, postnuptial agreements, and the like. What the largest percentage of divorce cases these days are, it falls into the category of what is commonly now known as gray divorce. And what gray divorce is defined as is divorces of couples over the age of 50. And that used to be baby boomers. And nowadays we also add Gen Xers into that category because they have aged into the category over the age of 50. Why is this the largest growing area of divorces? Well, there's a lot of different reasons for that, and some of it depends on the decade that we're talking about, and whether it's Gen Xers or whether it's boomers, and whether you're in your 50s or whether you're in your 80s. And some people chuckle when I say divorces in their 80s, but they are very common these days. People in their 80s are now vital. They're healthy. They're living, and they want to enjoy those years. So they are they're seeking to have that happiness and to enjoy it with either in solitude or with someone that they may enjoy, or for financial reasons or mental health issues, reasons that may lead to a separation from a long-term or a short-term spouse. So that is the definition of gray divorce. And now we're going to explore some of the reasons for the frequency of these divorces. So why are couples over 50 divorcing at ever increasing frequency? Some of it really depends on as I said, the decade. In the 50s, it's usually the very common, the kids are grown, the kids are maybe just going off to college, we've grown apart, kind of the same reasons that we see in people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. It's not that much unusual. What is unusual is that the 50s are now occupied by what is called the Gen Xers. And Gen Xers were raised differently than baby boomers. Women's lib had kind of come to its fruition. Women in the workplace were more common. Men taking on child rearing responsibilities had become more common. The expectations in marriage had changed. So reasons for divorce had changed also. So the reasons that you saw people, or you see people now in their 50s getting divorced, have changed also. I was talking to a mental health professional fairly recently, and she was telling me that what's happening with some of the younger people these days is that women are still seeing themselves taking on far more of the responsibilities of not only earning the dollars these days, but still taking on a lot more of the child care responsibilities and the home responsibilities also. And they're like, no. Lisa, go back to the prior one. So in the 50s, it's still, fairly typical reasons. You get into your 60s, and there's a lot of different issues at stake here. In the 60s, it's very common to see a third person come into the picture. Either the husband or the wife finds a new partner. And so people laugh at this and say, really? You know, in their 60s? And it's like, yeah, still a lot of romance going on in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And it's become very common to see someone find somebody else. So in your 60s, early 70s, that is a very common pattern that we see in the gray divorces is, hey, I found somebody else. I want that romance. I want, you know, a real relationship. I don't want a roommate any longer. I no longer want this boredom that my marriage has become. I want the excitement, and I want something new. And I've got 30, 40 more years. And for all of these gray divorces, that is a very big thing. For years, when my parents were around, when your parents were around, when our grandparents were around, you know, here's what happened is people got to their 60s and they said, why would I ever get divorced? I'm going to die pretty soon. You know, I'm going to be dead, you know, in a few years. So why would I ever get divorced? But now we're living, okay? We're living until we're 90 or 100. And so we've got 30, 40, 50 more years. And, you know, it's like the idea of, think about that. That's as long as you've been an adult at this point in your life. So if you're in your 60s and you're looking back to your 20s, that's 40 years, and you could be living another 40 years. You're looking at the same amount of adulthood that you've already had. And it's like, I don't want to spend it with this person that I no longer care about, I don't want to be with. So I'm not going to do this. So I'm going to get out of it now while I still can. And that has become a very common refrain, even with people in their 80s. I'm not doing this. I've got another 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm going to enjoy it either by myself or with someone else. I'm not going to be dead in 3 or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. I'm going to be alive. So that has really flipped the paradigm that we've all been used to. So that is kind of why it is happening. Another thing that we're seeing is our parents are living longer. So what is happening is people in their 60s or 70s are inheriting money. And I have seen this repeatedly, and we'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later too. But what is happening is that people in their 60s or 70s are all of a sudden inheriting significant sums of money from the prior generation. And all of a sudden they have this opportunity to escape, as they see it, to live a new life. And it's like all of a sudden they inherit $500,000, million, $5 million, $10 million. And it's like, that's mine. That's my non-marital. And I have an opportunity to move on to a different lifestyle. And I'm going to take advantage of it. Another reason we're seeing gray divorces is all of a sudden there's a financial ability to move on to a new lifestyle and to have the financial wherewithal to do so. Mental health issues, and this is where it can be very sad. You have mental health issues that hit later in life, and you all of a sudden one spouse just can't live with the other spouse. I've seen so many examples of this. I've had cases where people have come to see me. One woman came in, they were well into their 70s, very financially secure. And they owned several parcels of real estate, and the husband was spending a significant amount of time at their Wisconsin home. And one day he accidentally set himself and the residents of Wisconsin on fire and burned it down. He had an alcohol problem. He refused to get help, and he burned down the house. Another case where the husband all of a sudden transferred millions of dollars out of joint accounts and into accounts in just his name or his daughter from a prior marriage's name. It was the daughter who called the wife and told her. The wife hadn't been involved, and this is an issue that we see repeatedly where one side or the other is in charge of the finances. And she didn't even know this. The daughter called her to tell her that, you know, her spouse was doing this. And he was, we don't know why, but he was all of a sudden paranoid for whatever reasons and was just transferring all of the assets into his own name and just cutting the wife out of everything so that if he had died at that point, she would have gotten nothing. Mental health issues. I had another woman come in to see me, and no, I do represent men too. But these just happened to be cases that were just so visibly mental health issues. Her husband had grown to be 350 pounds and wouldn't get out of a recliner. Okay. And she was, you know, healthy and active and said, I am not going to live my life with somebody 350 pounds in a recliner. And he refused to get help. These are people who refused to get help, had mental health issues, and spouses who had tried everything to get their spouse help and could only see a bad ending, could only see being held responsible legally if something went wrong, if the alcoholic got in an accident, if the spouse who had transferred all the money died. All of these issues that were going to cause just great harm to the spouse who is seeking the divorce, not necessarily because they wanted a divorce, but because they had no choice. So these are some of the reasons that gray divorces occur. Sometimes people just don't like each other anymore. I mean, and they finally come to that conclusion that they just can't live with each other. So, you know, this living longer has raised a whole number of issues that we just didn't have to deal with in prior generations. And so what are the issues that come up then? Okay, what now we get to a situation where somebody does file for divorce. And what happens when a divorce case takes place among two older people who may be retired or maybe nearing retirement age? You've spent decades saving for your retirement in those cases. And you've probably had a financial advisor who has helped you put together your retirement. And you've done all those numbers and all those projections on how much you need on a monthly basis and how much you need to save and how much any retirement savings will generate and all those projections. You know, whether it's Morgan Stanley or Smith, now Smith Barney doesn't exist anymore, you know, any of them, you know, who you've dealt with, Schwab or whoever, and they've all done this for you. And you've got it all figured out. And you're getting either close to your target or you've reached your target and you've retired. And now you're going to get divorced. What happens? Because those retirement savings were based on planning for one household, one family. And now you need to support two households or two families. How does that work? Or does it? And that's the problem. And it's a major one, because I don't care how successful you are, and I don't care how much money you have. It's difficult. Because whether you have $10,000 and a month coming in and you divide it, now you each have $5,000. Whether you have $50,000 a month coming in and now you divide it, you each have $25,000. The numbers just aren't going to work unless you really truly are extremely wealthy. And even then, I've seen cases where one side or the other is disappointed that they can't get the yacht. They can't get they can't continue whatever the lifestyle is, because it is just very, very difficult to maintain two lifestyles. I see this pretty typically in upper middle class couples where they may have two homes. A home in Illinois and a home in Florida or in Wisconsin or Michigan or wherever. And what will happen quite often is that the one party will decide to stay in the primary residence in Illinois and the other one will live in the vacation residence in Florida or Wisconsin or Michigan. And that may work, and sometimes it does. Or what will have to happen is that both homes will need to be sold and the money divided so that each party can take the money and, decide where they want to live and buy one house. Because, maybe neither of them wants to live in whatever house that is. They both want the Illinois house, or they both want the Florida house, or they both want both. So then you'll have to sell both of them and figure that out. Or, maybe the houses are just too big and you're going to need to downsize those. Changes are probably going to have to be made. So there's ways to accommodate that. Because the dream that was out there probably has to be somewhat, somewhat downsized or changed, because it was a common dream, and now you need to have your individual dreams. An issue that arises that needs to be taken into consideration is the difference between men and women. Next slide, Lisa. Is that, and this should be taken into consideration when you're doing estate planning also, is women live longer than men. And despite the fact that women are now more in the workforce and have been for decades, and therefore have that same stress that men have, and despite the fact that there's been great advances in medicine, and that both men and women have had the advantages of that, and all the different changes that have taken place in society in the last decades, there still is a gap in the life expectancy of men and women. And this chart is from way back in 2012, with the 81 and 76. I have seen more recent numbers, and I think it's now like 83 and 70, 83 and 79 or something like that. But there still is a gender gap in life expectancy. And as I said earlier, most of us are going to live into our, late 80s, 90s, and you keep seeing people in their hundreds. My dad lived to almost 100. My mom lived to 95. I have their genes, but I'm not sure I have their fortitude. But we'll see. But it just isn't that uncommon for people to live into their 90s these days. And so these numbers are averages. And keep in mind, we have all these people who die in their 20s and 30s and in infancy. So those numbers are skewing that. Once you live to be 60, 70, or 80, you're probably going to live to be 90 or 100. So, your odds keep going up with every year that you do live. So, living to be late 80s or 90s is not that unusual, and women more so than men. And the issue that happens in divorces is there is still a gender bias, and the laws still favor the working, or the person who brings in the money, the person who is the primary breadwinner. In many gray divorces, the people are already retired, so this doesn't come into play. But in many cases, people are still working, and it does come into play. So what generally happens is that the assets will be divided 50-50, and the income, if you're already retired, will be divided close to 50-50. And we'll talk about this again in a minute when it comes to Social Security. But if you're still working, the non-working or the underemployed, and that's a bad way of putting it, the person who earns less will only receive 40% of the combined net income. And generally, despite, the advances that women have made in the workforce, it is still the woman. Now, I've seen more and more cases where it is the man, but that's typically in younger generational cases. When it comes to the gray divorces, it is still typically the woman who is the lesser earning person. So they are generally going to get less of the spousal support in a divorce case. And yet they're the ones who are going to live longer. So if they are getting divorced while people are still working, they're going to have less ability to fund their retirement moving forward. We also have the issue that, as I said earlier, this woman didn't know that her husband was moving all of this money. Women have a tendency to be less financially savvy and to pay less attention to what's going on with the accounts. And this is something that I'm always stressing anytime I talk to women, is to at least pay attention. Okay, you don't have to be necessarily the person who's making the decisions on the money, but at least pay attention to where it is and what is going on with it, so that if something happens to your spouse, or if you do end up in a situation where you do end up getting divorced, you are educated enough to at least know where everything is. But these are issues that women face, whether it's a divorce or whether it's a death. And, you need to really, truly understand what the finances are and be prepared, because you will probably be alone at some point in your life. It's just the odds. Moving forward and talking about being alone, if there's a gray divorce, it increases the likelihood of one or the other or both of the parties being alone. And aging medical conditions can cause the need for physical assistance or unplanned expenses, which Elderwerks knows a lot about. And this is something that, if you're going through a gray divorce and if you are of an advanced age, really needs to be taken into consideration if there are anticipated expenses. We're going to talk a little bit about insurance in a minute, but these are certain things that, if there's any, anticipated or known conditions, you need to discuss them with your lawyer, and you need to make sure that they are taken into consideration, because this is a factor in the division of assets as well as in the allocation of any spousal support. So please make sure that these are discussed. Let's be honest. We don't want to believe it, but there are cases where a spouse will divorce when a spouse becomes ill or has a medical condition. I've seen it. Thankfully, I haven't seen it that often, but I have seen it. And it's tragic when somebody leaves behind a spouse who is having physical issues. There are sometimes good reasons for it. It can be done to facilitate certain aid or certain benefits, that can be gotten, or to protect joint assets from being taken. I'm not going to tell you I'm an expert on that, because that is more an estate planning issue, but I have seen divorces that have been advocated for that purpose. I've also seen, and there is something called a legal separation. And I'm often asked about legal separations, and it is rare that a legal separation makes sense. But all a legal separation does is that it is a support statute that allows for the payment of support from one spouse to another. It generally does not allow for the division of assets, although if parties agree, it can. But what it does is it allows the parties to stop marital assets from accumulating in the future. but it allows the technical marriage to continue. So what can happen is that if you have a spouse who is seriously ill and you want to allow that spouse to stay on insurance, like medical insurance, but you also want to allow the healthy spouse to move on with their life and accumulate assets, you can do a legal separation and allow that to happen. So I'm just tossing that out there. It's far too complicated to talk about here. But if you ever end up in a situation where somebody is extremely ill, is not going to recover, but you do want to maintain them on medical insurance, it is something to take into consideration. Moving forward onto the loss of surviving spouse benefits. Pensions are no longer a big thing in this country. Government employees have great pensions. Most companies and corporations don't really provide for pensions anymore. It's primarily defined contribution plans as opposed to defined benefit plans. In other words, it's 401ks and the like as opposed to pensions. However, there are still some pensions, and like I said, government employees have great pensions. Some pension plans allow for a former spouse to be designated as the surviving spouse and receive the surviving spouse benefits. Why is that important? Well, let's say that you've been the spouse for 30 years and you're now going to get divorced. And there is this surviving spouse benefit, which would allow you to get to get continuing pension benefits in the event that your spouse died. And this would be great. But if your spouse remarried and was married for 6 months or a year to somebody new, you certainly don't want that person getting this benefit when you were the one who was married to him the whole time you worked at the company, right? Some companies don't allow this. Okay, they say that you have to be the surviving spouse at the time of the retirement, and there's certain rules about it. But you need a lawyer who can actually check into this and make sure and see if you can get the surviving spouse benefit, and make sure that if it's available to you, that you can get it. Social Security, when to commence benefits, and that this is something that can be tricky. And if you're not collecting Social Security yet at the time of the divorce, it is something that you should look into, because Social Security, as most of you know, can be based on either your earnings or your spouse's earnings. And as we talked about, one party may have stayed home with the kids or may have earned significantly less than the other spouse. So they may want to collect their Social Security at 50% of their spouse's benefit as opposed to 100% of their own benefit. People say, well, I want to wait to age 70 to collect the maximum. Well, if you're collecting 50% of your spouse's benefit, waiting may not make a lot of sense. So, you really need to work with the Social Security people to see when the best time is for you, and make sure that you're getting the best advice on that. And especially when you're going through a divorce. The divorce court cannot divide Social Security benefits between the spouses. So what this means is that if your spouse is getting the maximum of 4,000, however many hundred that is these days, and you're getting $2,700, there's no way to equalize that in the divorce court. The only way to make that equitable is through either an award of spousal support or through a disproportionate award of the assets. So again, you need a lawyer who can be aware that there are ways to fix this so that the two long-term spouses can walk out with some parity after a long-term marriage, but you also need to be aware that the court cannot say, Mr. Smith, you must give Mrs. Smith half of your Social Security check, okay? That cannot happen. They could say, Mr. Smith, you must pay Mrs. Smith $500 a month in spousal support because you have income from all sources that total greater than hers or something on that order. But I just need you to be aware that they cannot allocate Social Security benefits. The cost of divorce. A large unexpected expense if you're older and you've made this plan with your financial advisor and you've been working hard to, to get to your goals, and you think you have enough money to retire, and now all of a sudden you're going through a divorce that you did not expect. How much will it cost? And the cost can be anything. It really can. Everybody's heard the horror stories about the cost of divorce and lawyers charging so much money. And I can tell you that I have seen humongous attorney's fees in all kinds of divorce cases, young people, old people, every kind of case. Why? Why are fees so high in divorce cases? Well, we just talked about the reasons why gray divorces happen. And one of the reasons I brought up was that, somebody finds a third party. Okay, there's a new person in somebody's life. Well, I want you to think about what the other person thinks about. You've been married for 20, 30, 40 years, and all of a sudden your spouse comes home and says, honey, I found somebody new. Okay, well, that person's going to be angry. And if somebody's angry, they're not going to be willing to sit down at the proverbial kitchen table and settle their case. So what does that do? Okay, that puts up a wall, that puts up the resistance, that puts up the, no, I'm not going to settle. No, I'm not going to give you the kitchen table. No, I'm not going to give you your clothes. No, I'm not going to, no, I'm not gonna. Okay. And that means more lawyers' fees. We talked about mental health issues. Okay, how do you deal with someone who has an alcohol problem so bad that they set the house on fire? How can you negotiate with that person? How do you deal with someone who's told, I'm going to divorce you because you're 200 pounds overweight? Okay, I mean, these are the reasons why cases get dragged on. Yes, there are lawyers out there who will, what we call churn and burn. Okay, there are lawyers who are bad lawyers who will do that. But the real reason and the typical reason why cases cost so much is because one side or the other is unable to actually sit down and be fair or come to the table. When you walk into my office, okay, I can generally tell you exactly what's going to happen within a few percentage points or within a few dollars on every issue. I've been doing this a long time, okay? Unless there's a real question on an issue, okay? There could be a business valuation issue that may, have some real, kind of vagaries to it that could be up for grabs that I might say, okay, I really need an expert on that to get to the bottom of it. But typically, I can come pretty darn close to telling you exactly what's going to happen. And the only question is, how hard do you want to fight? How hard does your spouse want to fight? How many roadblocks are going to get tossed on? How easy are you going to make it for me? Not how easy am I going to make it for you? Okay, are you going to get me those documents? Are you going to cooperate? Is your spouse going to cooperate? So yes, there is going to be a cost, and then you've got to decide who's going to pay. And you've got to make sure that the costs are being allocated fairly between the two of you so that your estate does not take a big hit. And you need a lawyer, again, who knows how to do that. I talked earlier about somebody who inherits money at 60, 50, 60, 70 years old, okay? These are cases that are really, really, really can be mean-spirited and tragic. Imagine being married to somebody for 30 years, 40 years, and then he or she inherits $1 million, $5 million. And they say, bye, honey. Okay, I got mommy's money and I'm gone. And all you get is half of what we saved. I get to take my $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, and I get to go live on Easy Street. And guess what? You get to stay in the $250,000 house that we've been living in. Okay. And, whatever we saved. Hi. Yep. I've seen that a lot lately. Okay. And it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And it is mean-spirited. It is terrible. And but it can be the law. And what you need is that you need a lawyer who understands how you can get a part of that. You can get it through spousal support. You can get it through the payment of fees. You can get it through a number of different ways. Okay. But it's just a absolutely terrible situation. One of the things that I mentioned earlier that my firm does is prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements. And I have most of you probably have no idea what a postnuptial agreement is. I'm reading a chat thing that I'm getting here. You probably have no idea what a postnuptial agreement is. And what a postnuptial agreement is it's a prenuptial agreement that you do during the marriage. And the chat that I just got this is from somebody who said that happened to her, okay? And that the worst thing that happened was that she had gotten an inheritance and put it into the marriage. And I see that too. You're happy, everything's going along great, you get your inheritance, you put it into the house, you buy a bigger house, or whatever it is, you put it into a joint savings or investment account because you're going to share, you're happy. And then he gets his, and guess what happens? It's his. I'm out of here. And it's not fair, but it's the law. And what I suggest that people do is when you're happy and that there's inheritances are there, or you're giving your inheritance into the joint, account. Now, I can't see you guys, so I don't know who I'm talking to. But if you have children, okay, and they're going to inherit and their spouse is going to inherit, have them do a postnuptial agreement. Here's what we're going to do with our inheritances, okay? And here's how we're going to do this. When the wife gets her inheritance and the husband gets his inheritance, we're going to take that, we're going to jointly combine those and make them joint assets. Or if one of us jointly combines that, we're going to get that back in the event of a divorce. Okay, so that it's fair. Something, but do it when you're happy. Don't wait until one side or the other blindsides the other, because this is what is happening. But it can be undone through a postnuptial agreement, and there are ways to get at least a part of it through spousal support or payment of fees or other ways. The need to continue to work. Will you need to continue to work after a divorce if you're older? You might. And I when I walk into Walmart or other places, you see the greeters, are they people who went through a divorce late in life? Maybe. Is your divorce lawyer up here somebody who went through a divorce late in life? No, actually, I'm still happily married, but are people older working out of necessity because of great divorces, or are they working because it's keeping them engaged and because they enjoy it? And like I said, because we're living longer, and 70 is the new 50, or what is it? Great divorces sometimes do make it necessary to go back to work. I've seen many of my clients have to do it, some willingly, some not so willingly, some swear it's worth it. But it is a consideration that you do need to make if you're considering it, or if you know somebody who's considering it. As we said earlier, savings and assets cannot support two households in the same way that they supported one. And as my numbers earlier said, you know, if you had 50 million, it's 25 million. If you have 5 million, it's 2.5 million. If you have 1 million, it's $500,000. You just do the math. Whatever your monthly income was, it's the same thing. It's cut in half. You can look at going back to work as an opportunity to stay young, to engage, to be part of life, or you can look at it as an opportunity to be bitter, and to, you know, to be unhappy. You know, that's choices we all make with, you know, what we're dealt. Insurances. Okay, insurances are a big deal in all divorce cases, and especially in gray divorces. Health insurances, you know, again, if people are still working and have private medical insurance, the spouse will stay on for 2 years, or if you're over 55, you can stay on until Medicare age. Medicare is Medicare. Everybody gets their own. There's no reason to provide for that. Long-term care insurances, if you have them during your marriage, you know, you can make provisions in your divorce decree to keep them and for somebody to pay for them. If you didn't have them, the judge is not going to order them. It's not something that they will say is something new to be provided for. Life insurance. If you had life insurance during your marriage, the court will generally order it to be continued to guarantee spousal support or any support if there's children. And if you want to take out life insurance on your spouse, you can do so at your own cost, you know, but as we age, keep in mind the cost of life insurance can be very costly. But if you do want to do that on your spouse, you can do so, but at your cost. If it's there to secure support, then it's at the cost of the other side. Generally speaking, okay, the issues in a gray divorce are property division and spousal support. Those are the two issues, because there's generally no longer any custody or parenting issues unless there's a disabled child that needs to be provided for. So basically what we're dealing with is dividing up the property. We do a balance sheet and of assets and liabilities, and we look and see what's marital and what's non-marital. Marital being anything acquired during the marriage that doesn't fall in the non-marital category. Okay, non-marital is anything that's inherited, gifted, or owned prior to the marriage. And then we do spousal support, and spousal support is awarded if one side has a greater income than the other, which an income from all sources. So that's earned income, investment income, or lottery winnings or anything else. So income from all sources, and we look at each party's income from all sources, and then there's a formula that we use if the combined income is under $500,000, or we just look at needs if it's over $500,000. And those are generally the two issues. The complications come in on the valuations of the assets, especially if there's businesses or real estate where there could be some complications on how to value them. And the other complication comes in determining income. If there's a business where maybe expenses are being paid from the business, or if there's investment income, or, you know, certain income items that are subject to questioning. Let's say your car is paid for the business. Is that income or is that just a perk? It's income, by the way. You know, is if your business is showing a loss, you know, how do we determine that? You know, if you've got rental income, is depreciation, you know, deducted before or after, you know, to come up with the income. So those are the things that complicate matters. But other than that, it's basically just a balance sheet like you would see on just about any type of accounting sheet. And then the same thing with income. You know, we don't take it off the tax return. Okay, it is looked at individual, you know, just straight up. Okay, tax returns are, you know, a different animal. We look at it differently, and that's how a gray divorce is really looked at. And then looking at the next slide, I want you to meet the group. These are just my partners, and then we have a bunch of associates who also help us. But I put this slide up because I want you to see that we have a group of us and we've all dealt with gray divorces. And although only me and Bob are grays, we've done a bunch of gray divorces and we've dealt with a lot of people who have these issues. Erin and I, Erin being the first one next to me, just finished a case within the last year that went on. The trial went on for over 1 year, 20 or 22 days of trial over 1 year. When I talked about fees, okay, this was a case where each side spent over $1 million in attorney's fees. And by the end of the case, that the wife was 72 and the husband was 82. And the case had been going on for 6 years. I represented our client for 3 of them. And they were fighting. The case started over a fight of over $1 million. And by the end, they spent $2 million to fight over $1 million. Did anybody win? I don't think so. It was just a terrible situation of 2 people who dug in and could not undig. I saw my client a few months after the trial was over. I honestly almost didn't recognize her. She had gone from being a very unhappy, miserable human being to being really nice, upbeat, fun. She had just come back from a trip to Europe visiting her daughter and granddaughter. And it was just the change was unbelievable. Bob, who is the one on the far right, he is now involved in a case with 2 people who are both 83. They own a business and they're fighting because they hate each other. I mean, literally hate each other at 83. And the case just keeps going on. So the gray divorces in our office, and there's probably a couple more going on right now, but those are 2 that just come to mind. And the phenomenon is real. As I said, it is the fastest growing segment of divorce in the United States. A lot has been written about it, and that's about all I have this morning. If anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.